Okay, so chapter 15 is Canvas, and basically Canvas is a way to create graphics using HTML. And you'll be creating SGV style graphics, which is the vector style graphics. Remember, there's different types of graphics. There's vector, which is the mathematical type, and then we have the other one that if you scale it larger, then you'll start seeing the pixels and the images aren't as great. So SVG, no matter what size it is, or the vector, no matter what size it is, the image will look good, especially when you're using JavaScript in HTML. The images, since they're basically created with this mathematical equation, uh, the images will still look good no matter what size you put it, because it is just calculated again as you resize it. So that's what's really great about vector style graphics. Okay, so there's so many things that you can do with Canvas. And actually, as it says here, you can animate and control motion with elements. So you can actually create browser games and really interactive pages, and you don't have to use Flash. And I'm not sure if you all remember using Flash, but that was a way to create games online as well. And they really discontinued using Flash because of issues, but now we can use Canvas. So in addition to games and highly interactive pages, you can also create additional components or even pre-existing images. So you could actually create something like a logo for a company using Canvas. And you'll see later on that since it is an image that you created, you couldn't exactly just copy and paste the image like you typically would on a web page, just right clicking and save image. It's different. But of course, you could still save it different in another way. Okay, so to create the shapes in Canvas, you'll be using functions. Now, we've never discussed functions. You may have discussed functions with classes, programming classes, if you've had them before. And oops. Okay, so functions, when you are doing functions, and I really feel like I should explain it a little bit more. Okay, so functions. When you are doing a program, there are times when you want to repeat something over and over again. But you don't really want to, do the work over and over again. You just want to refer back to it. And a good example, I think, is, a song. And unfortunately, I don't know the term for it. Maybe I think it's chorus. Yeah, it's chorus. So when you're listening to a song, you have, a section of the song, the beginning of the song, and then you have a chorus. Or, you know what? Let me go ahead and pull up a song. And I don't know why, but for some reason, this is always the first song that comes to my mind. I know it's an ode song, but yeah. Okay. Okay, so if you do a search for, lyrics, let's see. Here are, the different verses of the song, But then at some point of the song, there's a part where it is repeated over and over again. So here's this part that says, "We are the world, we are the children." And then we come up with a different part of the song. But then again, you come up with this chorus part where it's pretty much exactly the same as it was earlier. So, but you see how they repeated it. They put this verse or this chorus here, and then they put it in again. But instead of actually saying the entire thing, even though it's exactly the same, you can just kind of say, okay, refer to that. So instead of typing this whole thing again, you can just say, we'll do that again. And you could have just written here chorus. And here again, it's saying pretty much exactly the same thing again. So instead of typing all of that, you could just say, put chorus here, or look back at this chorus. So that's actually what we're doing when it comes to programming and using functions. So let's say another example would be, let's say we have a program. This program, it explains what you do every week, or every day, I'd say. Okay, so every day, let's say on Monday, today, you're working with me, you're doing 1311, but maybe before you do this class, you're actually, you want to brush your teeth. Well, and when you brush your teeth, you actually, you're not just brushing your teeth, there's a process of doing that. First, you need to go into the restroom. Then you need to get toothbrush, get toothpaste, and all that process, put toothpaste on toothbrush, and then open your mouth. This whole process, you're doing it. So brush teeth really represents a whole bunch of steps that you would have to do to actually brush your teeth. So instead of putting that whole list of things that you have to do, you can actually cut it out and then put it down in an area called, that would be like a function. So instead of listing everything here, you can just say, okay, you have a function called brush teeth. And down on the bottom somewhere, or even on the top, you might put, okay, this is the function brush teeth. And I put parentheses here because that will typically tell you that something is a function. In many different programming languages, that the parentheses will tell you that. And it will be in JavaScript as well. So anyway, so what you're doing every day, on Monday, you're doing brush teeth, you're doing 1311, but then on Tuesday, you are not meeting with me. Maybe you're meeting with another class, let's say 1425, but before you meet with 1425, you're going to brush your teeth, which is really the brush teeth function, which is, all of this stuff here. So instead of actually repeating all of this stuff on Tuesday and Monday, you can just refer back to it, and now you know exactly what needs to be done at that point. Now, of course, typically people will know that, well, when you brush your teeth, these are the things you need to do. But when it comes to programs, you can have a function for so many different things. You can do a function for calculating something, or displaying something. Like, let's say you want to do a calculation repeatedly. So you would actually refer to the function to actually do the calculation. So a function, let's say calculate, and then inside of this function, you can say, okay, well, add something plus something, and I'm actually just going to say variable plus variable, something like that. And of course, this is pseudocode, so it's not really actual code, but this is another good example of doing pseudocode. You don't actually need to do the code, you just need to kind of put together, well, what exactly are you going to be doing with your program? Now, if you're not familiar with what variable is just a word that represents something to be saved in the memory. So in a program, let's go ahead and we're looking at now a program where you would be adding numbers together. And typically, remember that there are comments that you can put in code. Like in this class in HTML, there is, you do the dashes and a exclamation point for comments in code like that. But when it comes to JavaScript, we will be using the double dashes. So let me just put the double dashes here. So this program that we have, I'm explaining what the program is going to do, and it's to add numbers together. So what will you need to do to add numbers together? Well, generally, if you just add 2 plus 2, you would think that, well, 2 plus 2 is 4. But when variables come into play, you would actually want to ask a user what the number would be. Because if you write a program to add 2 plus 2, well, that's all the program is really ever going to do. It's just going to add 2 plus 2. But typically when you have a program, you'll be asking input from the user. So for example, if you look at ACEs, if you log into your account, you ask the user for input. You ask them for the username and password. The username and the password. You ask the user for that and then you process it. So that's, part of a web page. That is part of a program. So in this situation, the user will ask, or the web page asks for the username and the password. The user enters both and then presses the sign in button. And then in the background or on the page, it will, first possibly verify information on this web page, but then when you sign in, it will send the username and the password to the server to get processed. Well, JavaScript helps with sending that information to the server. So anyway, going back to the pseudocode here, you ask for information from the user. So you're not just going to use 2. I'm going to make this a comment again, just for an example, actually. So in this program here, instead of just always adding 2 plus 2, you might want to ask the user for a number, and then you would accept the number. And that would be basically the first number here. Then you would want to ask the user for a second number. So then you would do the same thing here. Ask the user for second number. Okay, and then accept number. Well, when you accept number here, well, you need a place in the memory to actually remember this number so you can later add it together. And that is where the variable comes in. When you accept something from the user, it is going to be a variable. So you're going to name the variable, and you could just name the variable first number. This is typically what a variable looks like, no spaces, and the second word is capitalized. Okay, and then you can assign a second variable name for the second number. And typically it makes sense. If I said first number, because you're asking for a first number, and then second number, because you're asking for a second number. And they're two different variables because you're asking the user for information twice. So we want to make sure that it's a variable for each one. Now, in the future, you might see that you can use the same variable, but then your program would need to be written differently. So anyway, so when you have a program that adds two numbers together, you're going to ask for a number. And of course, when it's different than just a given number, you want to ask the user for numbers. And after you ask the user for numbers, then you want to calculate it. You want to add the variable with the second variable. Well, in this situation, since we already have names for the variable, we have first number and we have second number. So then we're going to add the first number with the second number. Okay. And so that is generally a program that will add two numbers together. You're asking for one number, you're asking for the second number, and then you're adding them together. So, so that is, thank you, Jonathan. So that is, you know, how a program would be. But going back to what functions are, if you're going to be repeating this addition or even repeating asking for numbers, there are many different ways of adding functions to a program. So instead of just repeating something over and over again, you can just kind of call code that is already written for you. And that is actually what we do for functions or for Canvas. We have two functions here, and notice how it does have the open and close parentheses. These are functions here, and fortunately, these functions are already written. So we will be calling these functions to either have an outline or to have a fill in our shapes. And these functions are already created. So you don't actually need to determine, okay, well, what is the code to fill in a shape, or what is the code so that the shape is not filled in? Those functions are already created for you. You would just need to call them. Okay, and always remember that this is recorded, so you can always kind of go back and review you know, what functions are. I also have another video out there that explains functions that I could give you a reference to. Okay, so now that's functions, and we'll be looking at that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and look at Canvas in general again. So Canvas, remember Canvas in HTML using JavaScript is basically just a blank space. So like a blank painting on the wall of our web page. So if I were to actually, the basic program that Windows has to create graphics is called Paint. And if I open up Paint now, this is a blank area that I can work with. Of course, I can make it smaller, I can make it larger, however big I want my image to be. And then I just put whatever I want in on the canvas here. Well, that's what you're doing when you're creating Canvas in HTML. You are just creating a blank space. And actually, if I were to go back to the assignment, I have an image that represents what the assignment's going to look like. So here I have that this is a 500 by 500 canvas. So this is a blank canvas that we'll be painting on. And then in this canvas, I will need you to create a rectangle and then a triangle inside of it. So again, a canvas is just like the painting, a white canvas or white space to create your image on. And you need to create that canvas first before putting the image on it. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Another thing that's important is, you know, thinking back in high school, you know, you're looking at X and Y coordinates. So you have a graph and you're looking at X and Y. So in parentheses, you're looking at 0, 0. So an empty graph will have, we'll look, let me go ahead and do a little search real quick for a graph. And let's see, here we go. So in math, a graph will simply look something like this. You have your X and your Y coordinates. The thing is, though, is that it's not exactly like a graph because the middle point in the graph is the 0, 0 position. But when you're looking at canvas, the 0 position is at the very top left-hand corner. But we are still looking at X and Y positions. And again, I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, and right here it says the topmost left-hand corner. So at the very top, basically where you would find like file in any program. Okay, and so if you're looking at 0, 0, so whenever you use numbers, you're going to put however many pixels to the right or how many pixels down. So 0, 0 is at the very top left, but let's say I had 50, 50. So then 50 pixels to the right and 50 pixels down. So instead of 0, 0, it's 50 to the right and 50 down. And again, I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so first what we need to do, excuse me, first what we need to do is we need to create a canvas, which is the space that we're going to put our image. Now down here, we have the code to create the canvas, and it's going to be 300 by 300. And you can change that to whatever size you want. It could be, you know, 500 by 500 or just 100 by 200. It doesn't have to be the same number. Okay, but that's the space that you have to create your image. Okay, and just know that, so since earlier I said 0, 0, and actually let me use paint again, and let me go ahead and draw real quick. So at the very top left, this is 0, 0 position, and that really wasn't good. Let me go ahead and type. So up here on the top is 0, 0. That's the 0, 0 position. So if you were to go and in the code, put height is 300, width is 300, then at the very bottom down there, the point at the very bottom would be 300, 300. And then of course, all the points in between. So let's say if the numbers instead of 0, 0 was 50, 50. So, well, actually, let me go ahead and say, okay, well, 300. If 300 is here, that means it's 300 across and 300 down. So that means that at the very end here, this would be 300. So if you were to look at generally the middle, that would be 150. And maybe at the middle here, that would be 75. So if you were to have 50, 50 within this these parentheses, 50 would be at about here. And then you would have to go down 50, which is about here. because of course, you know, we're doing 300 across and 300 down. So let me go ahead and put the divisions here too. So 300, in the middle of that, it would be 150. The middle of that would be 75. So at about here would be 50. So our point, or wherever our image will start, will actually be at 50-50, about this spot here. And then you'll determine how big the image is, or the rectangle or the triangle, by using code. But we know if it starts at 50-50, it would be starting around that point there. And again, I will be describing that a bit more later. But going back to the canvas, the height and the width determines how big the canvas is. So we're starting at 0, 0 at the top left, and at the very bottom, you're saying how long it's going to, or how big it's going to be. If you wanted it a little bit bigger, well, then you're going to say something like, you know, 350 by 350, something like that. Okay. Oh, also one thing to make sure that you know is that any values larger than what you have here is not going to show up. So even if you were to have negative values, it's not going to show up on your canvas. So for example, I have 300 by 300 here. Well, let's say that the max, or whatever I put in the canvas tags here, let's say I just put 150 and 150. So that actually would be about this point here. So let me go ahead and put 150 and then 150. Okay, so if it was this point, that means that anything that I put higher than this number, it will actually not show up because I didn't put 300. So let's say I put 160 by 160. So the point would actually start at about here. But since I put in the canvas tag 150, well, you don't see 160. So that part right there is not showing up because you put 150 by 150 on the canvas tag. So you just have to be sure that whatever points you choose, it has to be within this number here. You also can't use any negative numbers, because if you use negative numbers, it would go like above or toward the left, which won't be seen as well. So just keep that in mind. And actually, I will show you that in just a bit too. All right, so let's go ahead and look at rectangles, but this is the code for all of your shapes. So remember, this is the canvas tag that just gives you the blank area to work with. Okay, so just a little quick information here. The act of drawing is actually a several step process. You first want to declare how you want the element to be. So are you going to use fill style or stroke style? And it's very important to determine the difference between the two. And notice how they both say style. One says fill and one says stroke. Fill will actually fill in the shape with a color. Stroke will only have an outline. So when you're coloring or creating the shapes, you have to determine, are you going to fill it in, or are you just going to have an outline? And these are the two differences. Very important for you to remember. And it pretty much makes sense. You're filling it in, or you're just giving a stroke, or just a, an outline of something. So anyway, you're going to declare how. So that's what the fill style or fill stroke. Then where you want to start it from, which is what we were just discussing when it came to the coordinates. And then you're going to decide what type of line or shape. So are you going to do a rectangle, triangle? What are you going to do? Okay, so those are the 3 steps of the process. And there's different codes, but that's generally the 3 steps. Okay, and to have a solid rectangle, or well, just to create the canvas, you want to have JavaScript. So this is what we're going to be working with now. So this is the code to actually create a square here. Now, one thing I want to point out is that this chapter really doesn't explain much about what we are doing when it comes to creating these shapes. So I think it's very important that you watch this video, or pay attention, because I'm going to explain a bit more than what the textbook will explain. Okay, so regular code that we already know. We already know this doc type is just basically setting, just telling whatever reads the page that we create that it is an HTML file. Then we have your HTML open and close, which is what we already know. Then we have body tags, open and close, something else we already know. I'm pretty sure I showed you script maybe once, but this is code we generally, or you may already know. But here's script, and then we have canvas up here. Remember earlier, now I know this is kind of longer than what we saw earlier, but this is the general format of the canvas, and really it's just the open and the close canvas tags. The only thing in addition would be the height and the width. I know that I've showed you that earlier or previously when it came to images. Just like a regular image, you want to, let's say you wanted to get an image from the internet, like a car or a cat or a dog. Instead of just pulling in the image, you can say, okay, well, I only want it to be 100 by 100, or you want it to be a small image, so you're just going to use 100 and 100, or you want it to be a big image, so you can put 500 by 500. So it's just the height and the width of whatever you create. And you could also use that within tables. So when you were creating tables, typically, would be only as big as the content of the table, but you can actually say, okay, well, I want it to be a wide table to give it more space. But yeah, so that's height and width, and that's in addition to just using the canvas tags. Now, if we look at this tag down here, it's a little bit more. So we have canvas. We talked about ID previously, and ID is a way to refer back to code, like a paragraph tag. You can have an ID. Remember last chapter we did input tags with the forms, and you would actually give it an ID or a name to refer back to it. And now I know that when I covered the input forms, you really didn't even need the ID or the name to actually have that field. You could just have, and actually let me go ahead and write it out. So I don't need that anymore. Okay, so when we created an input field, you could just put input, and that gives you a field, but it won't really do much. But it will just have a field. It will allow you to type something in. But then we have type, so that you can say, or that it will do verification to make sure that it's the right format. Well, then you may want to put something like name or ID, and I'll put ID just because it's in the canvas here. You can put ID and call it something like email address, something like that. And typically when you name something within code, you don't want to have any spaces. So I'm going to leave it like that. So now we have an input. It's an email type. and then we're calling it ID. Now, the reason why we would want to call it something is so that we can refer back to it. So when in the last assignment, we created a form, and when you click the button, it opened up an email. And actually, let me go ahead and do that just because it's easier to see. Okay, so I have a form here, and I'm going to go ahead and view the page source. Okay, so here's your form. We have a heading 1. We have a form, but here is the input field here, and it has name and autofocus, and that's it. We really didn't need the autofocus because that just puts the cursor in the field, and I can't exactly edit that. So I will go ahead and open up, right click, and then you can edit with Notepad++. Okay, so here is the one field that I'm looking at, name, and then that's just text right before it. We have an input field, and let me go ahead and just get rid of everything in this input field because I want to show you that even though I took everything out, it still gives you an input field. There, I just refreshed. And there's still a field here. There's nothing that gives information about the field, but it is a field. But the reason why we put name or ID is to refer back to it. So let me go ahead and save. And since I have this action mail to and method post, when I hit the submit button down on the bottom here, it's going to open up an email. I already saved it like this, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh and hit the button. And I don't have my email open, so it's just taking a little while. A long while. There we go. So it opened up an email, and notice how it has date equals here. Well, why does it have date equals? So let's go ahead, let's go ahead and look at that. Okay, it only has date because I only have the name here. So let me go ahead and change ID to name, hit save, and then refresh. Actually, I'm just going to minimize that. I'm going to refresh and then hit meow again, hit the button again. It's going to open up another email, and now it has name field equals blank and date equals blank. Why does it not have anything after that? Well, that's because I didn't type anything in my fields here. So let me go ahead and type something and then put whatever date. You press the button. And now it has the actual content. So that's why you create the name field and then the date field. Now that's one way to, and then it has the content that I added. So the ID is one way to refer to it, and name is another way to refer to it. So, you know, when it comes to forms, you want to have name there so you can specify the content. But with CSS, you actually want to put ID instead to refer back to it. So yeah, that is, I kind of went off a little bit there. But anyway, yeah, so that's why we have ID, so we can refer back to it, just like we used name for the forms. Then right here, we just specified, well, how big do we want our canvas to be, which was, you know, exactly how it is up here. And again, just using this code here, you can create a canvas. And I'll show you that in just a bit. And then we have width, we have height. And something we did not cover is the second line here, which is what cascading style sheets will look like. It'll say style, and then it'll say, okay, border is 1 pixel. It needs to be solid. And 1 pixel just means how thick it's going to be. If you want it to be a thick border, well, then you put 5 or, however thick you want it to be. Solid, you can make it just a solid line. You can make it a dashed line with dots, different options there. And this right here is actually the hex format of specifying a number. So, so all of this really is extra stuff. And if you were to just use the canvas tag, then it would still create your canvas. And I will show you that in just a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what we are doing. So you see here is what the textbook has, and I have my notepad here, and notice how it has the doc type, so I'll go ahead and do that. And also remember too that I do grade for having the doc type, so please remember to include that with all of your web pages. I also want to make sure too, I've seen a few assignments, I'm not sure if it's this class or not, but I've seen a couple of assignments that didn't have, well, I saw one that didn't have the HTML tags at all, so I took points off for that. Then I've seen a couple that didn't have the closed HTML or even the closed body, and I do take points off for that, so just be sure to include always the HTML tags and the doc type. And we're always going to need the body too. Notice how in the code here in the textbook, there is no head tags. I do have to say that typically the script tags will be in the head instead of the body, specifically when you're doing, well, most of the time the script is in the head, but for Canvas, everything will be in the body. So I believe the assignment requires that you have the head tags there and the title tags. And let me go ahead and close my email. Okay, so yeah, the assignment requires all of these tags here: doc type, HTML, head, title, and body. So even though I don't specify anything in the head or anything in the title, you at least need to have those tags there. So let me go ahead and do that anyway. Well, I'm not going to do that now because I really want to show you. But just remember in the assignment, you need the head and the title. Okay. So to create a canvas, you need the doc type, you need HTML. Let me go ahead and add the body. Remember to pay attention to indentations because that counts too. Okay, so now I have a body tag, and actually let me go ahead and save this file. And I will save it as canvas. Or no, let me just save it as class. Okay, and then I saved it in the downloads area in 1311, and then I called it class. And notice how it has a txt. Why does it have txt at the end? Also notice that there's no colors. Well, that is because I forgot to change this on the bottom here. I forgot to choose the type, hypertext markup language. So now it's going to be class.html. So then I go into the 1311 folder, and now it says class.html. Okay, so I do have a web page, but it just doesn't have anything in it. And if you look at the notepad file, yeah, there's nothing in it. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and see what else. Okay, so we're doing Canvas, okay? we're doing canvas in HTML. So I'm going to go ahead and type in the canvas tag. Okay, and as we looked at above here, there's an open and a close tag. So let me go ahead and do that. Actually, I don't want it. There's not a lot inside this canvas tag. If you notice in the code down here, there's the canvas tags up here. Here's the close and here's the open. And then we have the script tags, and that is actually where the JavaScript goes in to create our shape. So there's really 2 steps in the code. There's creating the canvas tags and then creating the script for the shapes. Okay, so we have canvas. So let's go ahead and see what happens if I have just canvas. Let me go ahead and save, and then I'm going to refresh. Okay, nothing there. Is it my code? Yes, it is. It still just has canvas. Okay. Well, how do we make it so that we have a border? Well, that is why they put the style here in the text. So that way it's easier for you to see that there is a canvas there. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to put it inside my canvas tag. So I do a space and then I paste. Now we have style border. We have a solid border, and it's this color here. So let me go ahead and save and refresh. Okay, so now we can see that there is a border there. And that's why we did this style here. So even though we haven't covered cascading style sheets, just know that this is the way to create a border. And really, you can just copy and paste or, type it up. Now, and also, since I'm there, I want to mention that there is a lot of content in here. And if you were to type it up, it would be very easy for you to make a mistake. So in this situation, I typically like you to type the code, but at this point, I actually recommend copying and pasting the code when you do the assignment. And I really, in this situation, I would highly recommend just copying all this code and then pasting it and then testing it out for yourself. I want you to see that all this code will actually create this square here. So let me go ahead and paste all of it just so you can see that it does do what the textbook has. Okay. And that was just for you to see it. I'm going to actually break it down for you in this video. Okay, so let's see. So we have HTML body, we have canvas, we finally have a border so we could see something. We can see that it actually exists. Now, remember the shape of it though. The default shape, oops, did I not save? Okay, the default shape is this shape here, but in the assignment or even in the textbook, it actually specifies the height and the width. So let me go ahead and copy and paste that part. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it right here, make sure there's a space, save and refresh. And now you see that the shape has changed. But let's say I didn't want it that big. I just want it 100 by 100. Save and refresh. And now it's a smaller square. And also remember too that it doesn't need to be the same height and width. You can make it 100 by, the height is 300, so it's going to be much taller there. Okay, so just know that you can change it however you like. I'm going to go ahead and do 300 by 300. And let's go back into this image that I created earlier. Remember, you know, 0, 0 is the top left-hand corner. The bottom is the height and the width. So since I just created a canvas of 300 by 300, this bottom corner here is the 300 by 300. So down here is that point there. And remember too that 300 is 300 to the right and then 300 down. Okay. And of course, you know, it just depends on which one's which. So width is going toward the right, height is going down. Oh, right. Okay, so let's see. So that's basically why we have the canvas tag, we have the width, we have the height, we have the style. Well, what is missing here? What have I not included here? Well, the code that I have not included is this ID. And remember, I was talking earlier that it's a way to identify the, you know, which canvas it is. And you can have multiple canvases on a web page, but we only want one, but still we need to identify it. And also notice here that we've identified it. And remember, because we need to refer back to it, but down here, we actually have canvas again. So here we're actually referring back to it and then canvas again. So it's very important at this point that you have ID equals canvas. So typically the ID or the name will be right after basically the very first one, but you know, it doesn't have to be. Okay. All right, so let's see. Okay, so canvas, you have to have ID so you can refer back to it. Okay, and so we have everything that's in here now. And then we have the close canvas tag. Well, we also have this text here, and it is just text inside of the open and close canvas tags. Okay, so, and the reason why we have that is because you may have a browser, probably not likely anymore, because, you know, this is an older text, but just in case, you just never know if somebody doesn't have an updated browser. So you really do want to include this message just in case. And there's a sad face right here. So that's not really code, it's just a sad face. But yeah, you definitely want to include this code just because you never know. There are, you know, people who have older browsers, or maybe they don't update their browser. Of course, that's not secure. But, you know, unfortunately, there are some people that, you know, aren't too familiar with what needs to be done. So I definitely will and should, I definitely recommend that you have this code here. Or at least this text, I mean. Okay, so we have now the canvas tags, but all we've really done here is we've just created a space to work on. That's all we've done. And if I right click and I do the page's source, it is everything that we put in so far. And that's a way to verify, because if you're just doing part of it and you're not sure if it's really updated because it doesn't look like it changed, you can always right click and view the page source to actually see that, you know, it is the current version. Okay, and another thing too that I want to point out is when you right click, you can actually do save image as. I know that I said earlier that you can't save it like normal, but you can save the image, and I'll show you later, but you can save it. It just won't be in the same format, because if you look at what we're doing here in HTML, it's code, it's not really an image. But when it does create an image, you can still save the image as an actual image instead of the code. Okay, so we've done this part here. So now we're at the part or the point where we want to do the script. We actually want to do the code that will create the image. So since the script is inside the body, we're going to go ahead and indent, make some space, close script. And then we're going to put our script inside here. Now, when you do the assignment, I highly recommend that you just copy and paste. But, and actually, yeah, I will go ahead and do that too. But first, I want to explain a bit about this. And remember to, I know that I am explaining this, but it's not going to be like part of the exam, but I just want to make sure that you are a bit familiar with the things that are going on here, and specifically the things that you need to change and not change. So this would really help when it comes to actually doing the code. But you're not going to be questioned on, this being a function, because remember I mentioned earlier that when you have the open and closed parentheses, maybe not all the time, but most of the time when you have open and closed parentheses, there is a function. So this is a function here. This is a function here. This is a function here. Fill rect. This is the function to actually create the rectangle and have a fill. Okay, so to explain these first two lines, this is the part that's not really going to be on the test, but it's important for you to know this. It's important for you to, just be a bit familiar with what's going on. So what's going on here is that we are creating a canvas, or we're creating a canvas, and we're using a function, and this function already has code to create a canvas. We're really just calling that code. And when it says document, we're actually referring to the HTML file that we're creating. And so the HTML file that we're creating, we want to get the canvas information. So the canvas will be called canvas. That's just what we called it. Okay, so that's what's happening here. We're just using a function to create the canvas. Then this is another function here to say, okay, well, it's going to be a 2D canvas. So the canvas that we have is going to call a function to say that it's a 2D image, and we're going to call that canvas 1. So, okay, what's important for you to know about this assignment when creating the assignment is that it's important that you continue to call canvas, or wherever you see canvas here, it needs to be canvas here, it needs to be canvas here. Notice how this part has canvas 1, this has canvas 1, and this has canvas 1. So basically this part is really all generating the actual canvas, and this part is where what you're going to use to create your images. So if I were to scroll down on the bottom here, notice how there's canvas 1 multiple times. Now it's 4 times here, but it's only 2 times here. So that means that these 2 lines are necessary to create this square. This line tells it what color it's going to be. This line tells it where it's going to be. So, so it's very important to know that there's 2 lines per item when it comes to rectangles. Now, there's different types of shapes you can do, but just know that there's 2 for rectangles. So if I scroll down to the next one here, you see that here's 1 rectangle, and then here's a second rectangle. And notice how they both have canvas 1. So they're both of the rectangles, they're both referring to, this code here to create a shape. So this code here will create these 2 shapes. And again, very, very important when you're doing this assignment that you continuously use Canvas 1 for the rectangles. Okay, on this next one here, yeah, there's 3 rectangles, so we have 6 lines here. Remember, 2 per rectangles or squares. Although it's a square, it's still considered a rectangle. Okay, and when we look at triangles, notice again that we are still using Canvas 1. Canvas 1. It's a different way to do that, and I'll cover that in a little bit, but we're still using Canvas 1. Okay, and again, okay, so that's yeah, that's still a triangle, different, just a different thing about it. Now notice here that this one says context, so that's that is actually not using Canvas 1. So, and to tell you the truth, I didn't assign this part just because I thought that it might be confusing. But anyway, it's still pretty cool to actually create the curves too. Because remember, you know, we're creating images, so it's not always going to just be rectangles and triangles. You need to actually create, you know, lines. And this is an example of how you would do a line. And yeah, so then, and then there's also text that you create, and I can cover that later on too. But also the reason why I mentioned that is because just like we were looking at Canvas and then Canvas again, and then we use Canvas 1, notice how at this point, you know, it has the line that creates something, but this time it has CTX instead of Canvas 1. And that's another reason why I didn't want to do the text when it came to the assignment, because they're kind of jumbling the code up a little bit on this chapter here. So I really want you to focus on creating the rectangles and then creating the triangles. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back. So again, very, very important that you continuously use the word canvas. You do not change that for the assignment. And then use Canvas 1 for all of these rows here. Okay, so let's see. Let's go ahead and focus on the 1 square. So we have this 1 square here. So we have only 2 lines here. Again, the one that determines the color and the one that determines the location. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this code. Okay, and I will make it look better. Because remember, it's much easier to see your errors when you have things that are clear. So now I'm going to save and refresh, and I'm just going to confirm that I do have that 1 square. Okay. Now, let me focus on, so I focused on the word canvas. I focused on Canvas 1. Very important that all of those are consistent. The next part I want to cover is this pound FF 0000. Now, I don't think I covered hex in this class so far, but hex is really, if you remember that computers, they don't understand English. They don't understand the words that we're saying. What they do understand is binary, ones and zeros. So when we type in something like this, it actually gets converted into ones and zeros so the computer can understand it. So one thing that, you know, so the ones and zeros represent what the computer understands. But there's another way to do it. Instead of doing just ones and zeros, you can actually do hex or hexadecimal numbers. Now, hexadecimal really means that there's ones and zeros, but they are represented differently. So I'm going to do a hex chart. And here is an example of a hex chart. And so remember that binary is the ones and zeros that the computer understands. Decimal is the number system that we understand as humans. You know, we count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, all the way down to, you know, million, zillion, whatever, billions. But anyway, basically the numbers that we look at is 0 through 9. And this one, I actually don't like this chart because you top. Okay, so let me zoom in a bit. Okay, so here is a decimal. We have 0 through 9. Now I know that there's 10, but 10 is really a combination of two numbers that are 0 through 9. So it's 1 and 0. Binary is just a bunch of ones and zeros, but that represents the decimal, but in binary. So this is what we understand. This is what computers understand. Now there's other numbering systems, but then there's also hex. Hex is another way to represent binary or even decimal as well, but it actually uses, now we do 0 through 9, binary only is 0 and 1. Hexadecimal uses 0 through 9 and A through F. So if you were to look at a bunch of zeros, or actually let's look at these zeros. 0 is all zeros in binary, and then there's 2 hex because it divides 4 and 4 zeros. 4 zeros is 0, 4 zeros is 0. If you convert the decimal 1 into binary, it's really all just a bunch of zeros and then 1. And then hex, the first 4 zeros is 0, the last four characters is 1. But anyway, I won't get too much into converting. I just want you to know that hex is 0 through F. And that's actually what we're using here. We're using hex codes to represent a number. And basically it's just, you know, just a binary or just a, you know, another decimal number, but just a different format. What is important about this is that you want to use a hex color to color your shape. So if you search for hex color or hex colors, you can see that the different representations will represent different colors. So here we have, again, this is a code that uses characters 0 through 9 and A through F. So here's an A, here's a bunch of numbers, but this one's using F, C, and B. All of these are hex codes that represent colors. And, you know, there's many different web pages that you can use. This one actually has specific colors, but you can actually, that was like favorite colors. So W3 Schools, that's a good website to go to. So let's do that one. Here we go. And this one's actually really good because, okay, so here's FF0000. Let's just say that I used, I'm going to use AC because those are my initials. What color does that produce? A grayish color. That's not pretty. Okay, and basically also the hex represents different colors, like different color combinations. So let's say I'm not crazy about green. There we go. So I'll put that low. Ooh, purple is good. So I'm going to click there. I'm just going to leave it like that. So if you use the hex color B621AC, you will actually get this purplish color. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to put that in my code. And actually remember that it was a red square. What happens if I were to put this hex code into my page? Brush, and there's your purple color. So that is part of the assignment. I need you to create shapes, but I need you to use different colors. Let me go back into the assignment. You see here it says choose any color other than red, blue, or black. No red, blue, or black. And the reason for that is because I want you to look for different colors. And notice how hex method, so you have to use the hex method, that's 8 points. And to choose a different color, that's 5 points. If you still use red, blue, or black, you're going to get 5 points taken off. So just be sure that you can, that you look at that hex chart to look at the different colors you can create. And again, just, you could just search for hex colors, and a really great site is the W3 Schools. Yeah, so just search for hex colors. All right, and actually, to tell you the truth, that will also help you with a different way of doing it, and I'll show you that in just a second. Oh, and if you want to learn more about it, you can, remember, this is a really great website to go to, W3 Schools, and we will be looking at that later on when we do JavaScript. So, very good site. Anyway, so we are consistent with using the word canvas. We are consistent with using canvas 1. We just used the fill style. And remember, it's fill, so that means it colored in the shape. We changed the color. We used a different hex color. And remember that, notice also that there's a pound sign at the beginning there, very important. If you don't do that pound sign, you're gonna have issues. Actually, let me go ahead and get rid of it and see what happens. We do refresh, and now it's just a black square. So just be sure to do that pound sign, because that's how the hex is represented. Okay, so the next line. The next line is fill rect. Again, we're filling it and we're creating a rectangle, and it's 50 by 50, or, well, it starts at the position of 50 and 50. This is, actually, let me go ahead and find that spot here. Everything inside of the parentheses, you can't really tell that there's parentheses. Let me go ahead and get rid of that. Notice how there's fill rect, and then there's open and close parentheses. The first number represents the left, or going toward the left, or the left position, and then the top position. The third number is the width, and the fourth number is the height. So left. Let me go ahead and change these numbers. So left would represent where it started. So let's say I want the rectangle to start at the very, very top left-hand corner. So I put 0, 0. Remember, on this image here, I said that the very top left-hand corner is 0, 0. So let's go ahead and try that. 0, 0. I'm saving and then refreshing. And now it's at the very, very top. Now, the second part of the code, if you look at the textbook here, it says the width and the height. So the width is 50 and the height is 50. So let's go ahead and change that. I want it to be very wide. So I'm actually going to put 200, and then I'm going to leave the height the way it is. So I'm going to save and refresh. See, so I have a wide square now, but it's still the same height. So now let's go ahead and change the height. I only want it to be 100, so I want it to be a long but kind of high square or rectangle. So there we go. You know what? I don't want it to start at the very top. So I actually want it to start maybe 100 down. So let me go ahead and change the code there. Okay, so remember, I want it to go down. So the top of the rectangle, I want it to be 100. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. Now, okay, let me just go ahead and show you real quick. The top of the rectangle is going to be 100. So when I refresh, there's the top of the rectangle at 100. But you know, I don't want it to be close to that line either. So I'm going to move it 50 spots to the right. So again, remember, left, or the very first position, is where it's going to start from the left. So I'm going to make it 50 from the left. So I save and then refresh. So I'm 50 from the left. So I know it's moving it toward the right, but you really just want to say that this is the left-hand side. Okay, so here's my rectangle here, and I'm happy with it now. Now, the thing that I wanted to mention about this is that I really want you to play with these numbers here. I want you to get familiar with them. And another thing too is that when you create a triangle in your code, you're going to want to change the numbers around, because I want your triangle to be inside of the rectangle. So how can you make it, when you create a triangle, how are you going to make it so that it goes down into the rectangle? Or move the rectangle so that it's around the triangle. Okay, so yeah, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay, I mentioned the oh no text, which means that if the browser is outdated and HTML5 is not supported or JavaScript is disabled, you have a message telling the user that there's an issue. I talked about the hex style already. And also, there's actually different ways of doing it, to tell you the truth. But just remember, the assignment requires a hex, but I'm going to go ahead and say green, and you can still color the rectangle using just text, just so that you know. And then there's also the Rgba method, which is what I'm going to show you in just a second. Here's the Rgba. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this one here. And actually, let me go ahead and just change it. Notice how my rectangle here, I just put green. I change it from the hex, and then I put green. Well, you could just use the Rgba method. So if we go ahead and copy, and then just replace whatever's in quotes here, and then save and then refresh. Now our rectangle is a different color. Well, let's make it a little bit more obvious. And actually what you should do is just do another search for the Rgba. Oh, here we go. Here's Rgba right here on the w3schools.com. So again, you can just do, let's say I want to do another purplish color. So don't need green, but need red and blue. Actually, let's do a lighter color. I just want to be a little bit more obvious that it's a different color. Okay, so then you choose a color that you want from here, and then you can just copy and then paste. Now notice how there's 3 numbers here. If you look at the text here, we have 4 numbers, and basically that means that it's red, green, blue, and then has the opacity. And basically what that is how see-through it is. So let's go ahead and just use the numbers that we got from the website. I'm going to do copy. Oops. Oh, I hope I'm not stuck somewhere. Yeah, it seems that I'm having technical problems. Can you still hear me? Okay, that's good. Okay, it looks like it was just that page. Woohoo. Okay, so let's go ahead and, oh, and thank you, James. So I am going to do, okay, and notice how it says Rgba. It has the opacity or opacity. So let's just go ahead and do RGB and see what happens. So I'm going to save and then refresh. And there's our purplish color. So you can, even though the text has RGBA, you can still do RGB. And I'm going to go ahead and leave out the fourth one just because I can't really show you right now what it really does. But either way, just as long as you remember that in the assignment you have to use a color other than red, blue, or black on each of those, each of the shapes, the triangle and the rectangle. Okay, so, all right. So that's the color there. We talked about the two different colors. We talked about the different sizes in each one of those positions there. Remember, canvas has to stay the same. Canvas 1 stays the same. Okay, and I also want to point out too, is remember that these two lines represent one rectangle. These two lines represents a second rectangle. And also remember too that we do not need to repeat these VAR lines here, okay? Just go ahead and repeat those two. And let me go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and copy, and then I will paste so that we have two rectangles. So I'll save and then refresh. Okay, and now we have two rectangles. So now it actually looks like I'm maybe even creating some sort of image there because they're coming together. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so that's all you really have to do. You just have to have the code to have two shapes. So for the assignment, you have to have two shapes as well. So actually, let me go ahead and see, well, how can we put this shape inside of this shape here? What would we have to do? Well, they both start at the same position from the left. The first one starts at 100 from the top, and the second one starts at 200 from the top. Well, what would happen if the second one started at 150? Would it move inside of here? I'll save and then refresh, and it moved inside. And that would actually count. For the assignment, we need a triangle inside, but this would count if this rectangle was a triangle. Okay, well, let's go ahead and look at that. How would we put a triangle with the rectangle? And this is the code that says we do not need to change the names when declaring that first rectangle. So remember, we have canvas 1. You can use canvas 1 again. All of these need to stay the same. Okay, and the same thing when it comes to a triangle. Oh wait, was this just, yeah, oh, okay. Yeah, the same as when it comes to a triangle, but let me go ahead and cover this part here. This part is actually explaining how you can go off of the canvas. Remember earlier, I mentioned that the canvas will start at 0, 0, and at the very bottom, it's 300 by 300. But if the end of our canvas was at 150, anything using the 300 numbers would not even show. So let's go ahead and show that right now. So for example, this second rectangle, I'm going to go ahead and show you again. This is what it looks like. Now let's say that I wanted the second rectangle to start at 400. Remember earlier, the width and the height is 300. So what if I said that I wanted to start it at 400? And then 400, oops, not 4,000. 400 by 400, if I save and refresh, you just don't see it anymore because it starts way on the bottom here. So let me go ahead and make it so that maybe it starts at 300. Would that work? If the rectangle started at 300, save and then refresh? Well, no, because the 300 is this very last dot here, and that's not going to show anything because there's not enough space. Well, actually, if that's the situation, what happens if I were to create a bigger canvas? What if I said I wanted my canvas to start at 400? And then I save and then refresh. There it is. We created the canvas, so now we can actually see the rectangle down there. So so that's just a good way to play around with these things and see what they do. But yeah, so I made it appear just because I made my canvas bigger. All right, let's see what else. Okay, so that's basically what this one was covering, and it actually shows, part of the third rectangle at 300. They actually started it at 275 by 275. So part of it is showing. Oh, and another thing too, very important, is case sensitive. Remember earlier I mentioned that canvas needs to stay the same, but it also needs to stay the same with capitalization. So let's say this V I had capital, and then, well, it still recognizes it as the same, but you're going to have issues if you have a capitalization anywhere. So just be sure that it's case sensitive and that you use the, at this point, just make it all lowercase when you're using Canvas or Canvas 1. Now, when it comes to fill rect and fill style, it has to be with the S and the R capitalized because that is the name of the function that allows you to use colors and the size. All right. Okay, so so this one right here, remember, we have a choice between filling in the shape or just having an outline. So we actually want to use either fill or stroke. Fill, of course, will fill it in, color it in, and then stroke will not have it. So if let's say the bigger one, I'm going to go ahead and make that a stroke style. And always be sure to change both. So if you want this, okay, you also have to spell it right. If you want a shape to be either filled or stroked, it needs to be consistent. So both of these lines say stroke. You have to remember that. So if I save and then refresh, there is my first rectangle, and it only has the outline or the stroke. The other one has a fill. And that's the way to change it. It's not overly complicated. All right, so let's see. Okay, so now we're in the section with triangles. Triangles are different. Some parts are different. So you notice that canvas is the same. Remember, it's just space that we create to do something. Then we have the script tags. Inside of the script changes a bit. Notice that the two var lines are exactly the same. Okay, very important that you know that they're exactly the same. But we have different lines when it comes to creating the triangle. Remember I said comments? I mentioned comments. You just do the two lines. Well, these are comments here, and they are not required. They are just there, and actually they're really good for you now learning what each one of these lines is doing. So this line here is setting the starting point. This line here is to move the pen, is moving it down. This line here is moving the pen again, and then we're closing the path and actually creating that last stroke. So all of these lines here actually represent the triangle. So let me go ahead and copy and paste this. And remember, I am okay with you copying and pasting because you have to be very careful, because when you're doing coding, it's very important that you do everything right. Every comma counts, every semicolon counts. All of those things matter. Okay, so I basically, in my page, I just got rid of my actually, I should have showed you. Okay, notice how I have two rectangles here. I'm actually going to remove my rectangles, and then I'm going to paste this one triangle. I'm going to indent it because, of course, that makes it look better. And then save, and then refresh. And now we just have this one triangle. Also notice that it's just the stroke. It is only the outline. How do we know that from here? Because it says stroke style. And then it also says stroke down here. Be sure to be consistent. And actually, let me go ahead and show you real quick. So if I put fill, and also notice that there's nothing else here that says stroke. That one does say stroke, but let me go ahead and leave it the way it is, just so I can show you what it does. Okay, well, it didn't fill it in. So let's see what happens if I type in fill. And there we go. There's the fill. Okay, well, why is it that color there? Well, because it has that Rgba. And let's not have it that brown color. So I'm going to go to this web page here. I'm going to go ahead and copy that again and just replace this, just like we did in the rectangle. Save and then refresh. Okay, now we have a better color. See, so really it just the fill part, just whatever is before style is what you want to change to either make it a fill or a stroke. And then if you want to change the color, it's just a matter of this part here. Now, just like we did in the rectangle, these numbers represent the position of whatever you're doing. 150, 150, it marks the starting point. So this very first point at the very top, that's at 150. Let's change it. Let's actually just say that I want it to start at 20 and then 150. Let's see what happens. Save and then refresh. And it's all the way to the left. That's 20. Okay, move our pen down 50 pixels. Well, what if I still want it to be a straight line? Let's go ahead and change that to 20 as well. Save and then refresh. So now it's a straight line and it looks more like a triangle, but when you do the assignment, as long as it has 3 sides, I will be fine. And I just want to go ahead and finish generally before I stop this video. So I just want to point out that to have a rectangle and a triangle, all you need is, of course, all those lines for the triangle, and either before or after, it doesn't really matter. We want to copy and paste the rectangle code in the same area. Remember, you don't need to repeat these var lines. So I do save and then refresh. So now we have two shapes, and really now it's just a matter of fooling around with these numbers so that you can get that rectangle inside of the triangle. So let's see what happens if I start at 200 by 200. I save and then refresh, and now it's there. So I started down there and it ends good, but the triangle is not inside. So I still have time to fool around with this. So let me go ahead and change it back to 50, because that was a good position, but it just wasn't big enough. So let's change the height and the width. So I'm going to go ahead and do, I know it's not going to be right, but I'm still going to put 100 just to kind of show you. Save and then refresh. Okay, so it's a little bit bigger. What happens if I make it up to 200? Save and then refresh. Okay, so it's almost inside of it. So now you have an idea of how to move things around so that you can put the triangle inside the rectangle. But also remember for the assignment that one of them needs to have a stroke, one of them needs to have a fill. And I don't remember. Oh yeah, it's the triangle that needs to have a fill. The rectangle needs to have a stroke. So yeah, that's pretty much all that you would need to do for the assignment. There's oh yeah, I do want to mention the header, because you do need to do a heading above this canvas. And all you really have to do is just put H1 and something inside, and then close. And now it's down here, so we don't want it down there. So let's go ahead and cut that out. And maybe if we put it right above canvas, what happens? There it is. And I think pretty much that's the assignment there.